To it. Joining us again is our good friend from FIRE. Of course, that's the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, Zach Greenberg. Zach, welcome back to the Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Now, free speech is an issue near and dear to the heart of the Coalition. As I like to tease my Republican friends, the Constitution is a wide world that spans beyond the Second Amendment. There's the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 9th, the 14th, and as our president found out, there's the 25th. I guess just this week.
Yes, there is.
There is. So, Coalition listeners, I invite you, particularly my recovering Republican friends, to come in and embrace the Constitution. I want you to make it as if it's yours, because, well, folks, it is. So, there is no more pressing battlefield, if you will, and I use the term battlefield intentionally, on so many different levels for First Amendment rights than college campuses. FIRE is right on scene discussing this, promoting legislation, talking about real-world solutions to how we get back to that point not so many years ago where campuses were a hotbed of First Amendment, not a group of individuals seemingly hiding from it. We're going to talk about a survey that's both compelling, eerie, and scary at the same time. But first, Zach, I want to lead off. There's a term you used in the last show that I found particularly compelling, both here on a local basis and nationally. What is that term?
It is the Hecklers Veto.
The Hecklers Veto. So let's go over that again. What is the Hecklers Veto?
The Hecklers Veto is when a group of people substantially and materially disrupt a speaker so much that the speaker is prevented from speaking. Usually it incorporates some sort of violence, such as throwing bottles at the speaker or being so loud that the speaker cannot be heard by the audience.
Now, you would think in the year 2017, we wouldn't have to explain why that's a problem. And I'm going to confess here on the air that there have been speakers here in Providence whose personal behavior, their moral code is so egregious, they are so despicable that it's difficult for me not to be sympathetic. But what does the Hecklers Veto actually foster?
The Hecklers Veto, it fosters an attitude that we should use violence to suppress speakers that we disagree with. It is an incredibly arrogant tactic because what it does is it takes the majority of people and it says, look, we don't care what you think. We're trying to shut down the speaker because we personally believe that the speaker's views are not worth hearing. And so it teaches these lessons. When the college ratifies the Hecklers Veto, or when any organization ratifies the Hecklers Veto by shutting down the speech based on the violence or threat of violence, it teaches students and people the wrong lesson, that it's okay to use violence to censor those we disagree with. Now,
there's another term that's very important to tonight's conversation, and that is the quote-unquote disinvitation. What is a disinvitation?
A disinvitation is any attempt to get an invited speaker to a college to get the speech canceled through protests or through any means of getting a scheduled event, duly authorized and scheduled event, to be canceled.
How frequently is this happening in America now?
Well, FIRE has a disinvitation database where we track all the disinvitation attempts that occur on college campuses, and it's a couple dozen disinvite conservative speakers. We also have conservatives trying to disinvite liberal speakers.
And where is the faculty, and more importantly, I mean, I can understand how a particular faculty in a particular department might be myopic. Is that the good word for today? I'm trying to keep it positive. But myopic about a particular issue, perhaps in some cases, an individual has been involved in a particular academic discipline, sometimes for a generation, their entire lives. I understand where the passion, however misplaced, might come. But what is the role of a college president, of a college administration in fostering free speech?
I mean, the vast majority of colleges in America have a mission statement and have policies that explicitly protect free speech. They protect the search for truth, the discovery of knowledge and new ideas. And as the president, he is charged with enforcing, or he or she is in charge of enforcing that mission statement. So they have a moral and may even be a contractual and a legal obligation to protect free speech in our college campuses, which requires them to allow a wide variety of speakers to address their campus.
So even at the mythical but so entertaining Faber College, where Mr. Faber, the founder of the university, pointed out in one of the great film noirs in American history, of course, I'm talking Animal House, knowledge is in fact good, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is.
So we've got a situation now where we've got folks on the right, folks on the left. There's all sorts of terms, derogatory terms, butthurt, snowflake, you name it, where they're ironically being thrown at each other, very often becoming parodies or caricatures of that which they purportedly detest, isn't it?
It's true. And these Hecklers Vetoes, these dissertation attempts, it assumes that students are too weak to live with freedom, that they're too weak to use their own speech to counter other speech, that they're too weak to be exposed to intolerant and offensive and hateful ideas. But we at Fire disagree. We believe students are strong. They have the foresight to learn from history. They have the ability and the courage to confront those they disagree with and thrive in a society where who's right and who rules is determined by the marketplace of ideas and not in a boxing ring.
Right, and this is the tragedy, because the not so subtle irony here is that when you are young, and particularly if you are so blessed to have the skills and the economic opportunity to be a quote-unquote university student, this is the time when you should be challenging authority. You should be, and when I say authority, I'm not talking about just the police or just law enforcement. I'm talking about all forms of authority, all forms of didactic training, all forms of, anything that represents itself as an absolute. That's really the role of the university, isn't it?
Exactly. The goal is to challenge orthodoxy, all forms of orthodoxy, political, social, religious. The goal is to innovate, to increase our expansive knowledge, and to try to find these new ideas. And to do that, you need academic freedom, you need free speech, you need a certain amount of fearlessness that comes with being a college student and having the audacity to go out there and be exposed to ideas you may disagree with.
You know, one of the more compelling terms in the libertarian movement is you want to be that audacious libertarian, that libertarian. Yes. Yet at the same time, as arguments devolve into increasingly secular amen choirs where we preach to each other and to only those who we feel comfortable with, we've lost that audaciousness, that bodaciousness that was really representative of the 60s. And here, as someone who is a child of the 60s, although I was born in the 60s, I wasn't in college in the 60s, for the record, the very generation that celebrated challenging authority are the ones that have really created this environment, haven't they?
I mean, these free speech zones, these free speech policies, they've been in place at universities for decades, for possibly the last half a century. And so we're seeing them enforced right now, but they have been enforced for a while, and they've been uniformly struck down by courts when challenged, especially at public universities. And you're right, there definitely is a generational divide in terms of free speech knowledge and feelings towards the First Amendment. But we believe today, just as in a couple decades ago, just as in a couple decades from now, that college students are still strong, that they still have the ability to challenge those they disagree with and be exposed to the tumultuous world of the First Amendment and of free speech.
I can remember, I was in university in the late 70s and early 80s, where if you were involved in any sort of formal debates, you were routinely expected to be able to debate the argument from both perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
Or even a multiple perspectives. And that was something that was admired. If you had the fortitude, if you will, and the depth of knowledge about an issue that you could advocate for each side, that was seen as a strength. That's not the case anymore, is it?
No, it's not. That's a great point, because one of the famous texts on free speech on liberty by John Stuart Mill, he quotes Cicero by saying that he who only knows one side knows nothing at all. You need to know both sides of the argument, which requires you to study the side that you disagree with.
Right. I mean, in my own experience, and we were fortunate to have an editor from this publication here on the show just a few short weeks ago, as a young lad, the first newspaper I ever fell in love with, ironically, was the Village Voice in Rhode Island. I'm sorry, in New York City. And the Village Voice was really, it spanned every potential political perspective, arts, culture. and presented real writing and real challenges to all of them. So much so that, in true confession here, the first campaign I ever worked for as a 12-year-old was CREEP, the Committee for the Re-election of the President, which sadly the campaign lasted longer than the presidency. But I was able to, through that publication, make the jump from being, your ultimate teenage Republican. Think about that for a moment. Your Alex Keaton caricature, if you're of an age enough to remember a certain TV show, to becoming the worldly smart guy I am now. Shut up, Tony. But it was that willingness, that openness that was expected. You were considered a lightweight if you didn't really understand the entire issue. So your organization now, let's talk about a survey that you just released the results of, and let's talk about how you developed the survey, the questions, and what the findings were. So take over the show for a few minutes.
Sure. It is the most comprehensive survey on student attitudes about free speech to date, and we partnered with YouGov, California. It was made possible by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation. And what we did was we surveyed about 1,000 college students, and what we found was that they had really interesting attitudes towards free speech and the First Amendment. A couple of our snap judgments real quick is that the majority of students in college campuses, they self-censor in class, they support disinviting some guest speakers with whom they disagree, and they don't know that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment.
Now let's focus on that for a second. Well, first of all, what type of sample size did you use? I mean, how did you find students, folks like ourselves who are observers of institutes and great organizations of thought? We're always intrigued by this. How did you develop the questions, and what were the logistics involved?
Sure. Well, I'll do the best I can because I'm a lawyer and not a statistician. But we surveyed 1,250 American undergraduates from May 25th to June 8th. And I can't speak to the models that we used, but it has a very high accuracy rate. And we believe that this accurately represents the American college student. Mm-hmm. And so what we found was that a large majority of students, I would say just a good majority of students, they have a lack of awareness of what the First Amendment protects. For example, many believe that the First Amendment does not protect hate speech, and hate speech is unprotected by the First Amendment. Meanwhile, it has always been protected by the First Amendment since Supreme Court precedent for a while now.
Yeah, and what's intriguing and horrifying at the same time is if you're old enough, you remember Skokie, Illinois, back a couple of decades ago, and the infamous interaction, with you will, with a variety of hate groups who I won't even dignify, but you had the environment where people were ready to go to battle with them, but at the same time allowed them to speak. How is it possible? We're vile hate speech, as despicable as it is critical in your analysis of the motivations of someone advocating for a particular political thought. If we simply don't discuss it, or we don't give the people an opportunity to, in a sense, out themselves, then aren't we shielding ourselves from understanding their true motivations?
That's a great point. And one of the biggest arguments against banning hate speech is that there's little evidence showing that banning hate speech actually creates a more tolerant and respectful society. I mean, we cannot eradicate hate from our society by simply censoring those who express it. We need to address these individuals. We need to get them out into the open, and we need to counter speech we don't like with more speech, not censorship or violence. So I think it's really important to realize why hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. And one of the reasons is, like you said, that in our society, we resolve our differences not by using the force of law against those we disagree with, but by having these productive conversations in the marketplace of ideas and having these discussions with one another.
And so if we coerce people into going underground, we're not really eradicating hate, are we?
No, we're not. We're just burying it. And some studies show that by burying this hate, we cause violence. It gets bottled up, and without the safety valve of the First Amendment to allow these individuals to express themselves, it can become a very violent situation very quickly.
Right, and there's also, and if you've been fortunate enough to have a classical education, when I say classical education, I'm not talking about just reading the classics, but a classical education is something that addresses thought, discussion, analysis of the spoken word, great art, all of this. If you understand, or if you've had a classical education, you understand how critical it is to involve that type of exposition of the thought, because there's an intellectual maturation process that takes place as you work your way through this. I mean, we've all met plenty of, what Billy Joel, I think, referred to them as angry young men, 16, 17, 18, and in some cases 57-year-old men who become incoherently angry at a situation because of their inability to really, A, develop thought, or B, find a way to express it.
It's true. I deeply appreciate the reference to Billy Joel as a Long Islander. I do appreciate that. And it's true. It's true. People get very angry when they have these very passionate viewpoints that they believe wholeheartedly, and that people tell them to shut up, or the government says you can't say that. That will make me angry. That'll make it think anyone angry when you're being told to shut up, or that you can't say that. And I think the best outlet for this, the best way to combat hate in our society, is to engage with these people, to talk to them, or in some cases, to peacefully protest them and show them what we believe.
Right, because ultimately, this is how you create martyrs. And when I say martyrs, I mean in the worst possible situation, where the anger internally becomes developed and directed at the inability or to be allowed to express yourself, as opposed to righteously either at the cause or source of the anger, or your own, shall we say, immature thought processes. I mean, it essentially stifles not just expression, but it stifles individual growth, and it stifles the ability to freely associate with those that you choose, often bringing you into direct contact with people with opposing viewpoints who you're taught to respect, not just to simply shut off. And that's really the biggest problem, isn't it? We have a body politic now where effectively there are two separate camps that have shut off the existence of the either side. And can we say that's productive at all at any level?
It's not. I think there's this idea that we should demonize people we disagree with, that if you disagree with what I say, you're just a terrible, awful human being, and I don't want to be involved with you. And that's a really dangerous notion, because in a democracy, we have to talk to those we disagree with. There's not going to be anyone out there that agrees with us perfectly. And so it's very detrimental to us when we close ourselves off from those who we disagree with, because often those are the people we learn the most from.
So what, from your experience with this analysis and speaking with people and running these polls, what are the, I mean, I'll promote one root cause. I believe a lot of this stems from the failure to really teach civics at the primary level. I'm one of those, I'm a libertarian, yet one of the few things that I believe in terms of enforcing is forcing folks to at least discuss and learn about fundamental civics. That makes me a bad person, guilty, but in the absence of any understanding of A, what type of democracy or representative democracy / republic we really have, and B, a real frank discussion and academic pursuit of the Constitution for the sake of the academic pursuit. In the absence of those, how can we expect people to act anything but from a wellspring of emotion as opposed to really critical thinking? That's my own thought. I mean, what have you folks seen in terms of the civics education that's ongoing in America today?
These studies show that there's a lack of knowledge of First Amendment free speech principle among the young people in our society. And a lot of that is, like you said, a lack of education in high school and college. And there's even many lawyers running around right now that don't really know what the First Amendment is or how it operates. So I think you're right. I think we could incorporate a First Amendment-like curriculum to our college students and our high school students, such as civics classes. And if you're going to learn about the Bill of Rights, if you're going to learn about what a democracy is all about, I think you cannot teach what democracy is unless you focus on free speech, on the First Amendment, on how we engage with our fellow citizens and make change in our society, which needs to be done through the fruition of the First Amendment. It is vitally important, and I completely agree with you that we need to have some sort of civics education in high school and college about this.
Right. Now, there was a television show out years ago, and I think it probably predates you. I believe it was called The Paper Chase, and in that show, it took place in a law school where the Socratic method of teaching was employed, where arguments were put out to the class, and again, you were forced to, through your own wit, your own skills, and your knowledge of the issues, forced to debate them in a pretty rigorous environment. I don't know when I've seen that type of focus in the public school systems in America. Does that exist anymore, or are public schools effectively working to squash that type of dissent?
I mean, The Paper Chase, that was a great movie. Professor Kingsfield, I remember.
Wow, I'm impressed. Tony, I don't feel that old today.
Good. And that's really important point, because yes, the Socratic method, this whole debate philosophy, it encourages students to learn about free speech principles, because you have to talk to those you disagree with. You have to learn both sides of the argument, and you have to really engage in ideas that you may find uncomfortable and may shake your very foundation, which is what the point of college is all about. So I think if students are going to take philosophy classes, they're going to take political science classes, they're going to take some sort of civics or American education class, they should be exposed to not only this debate rhetoric, this debate philosophy, but also have to maybe engage in a debate and have for themselves have to argue an idea that they don't believe in order to show how in our democracy we have a vital interest in engaging with those we disagree with.
Now, the last time you were on the show, just a few short weeks ago, your organization actively works with, I'll use the word aggrieved individuals at the university level who find themselves on the wrong end of the university law, which seemingly bears as much relationship to civil law as in fact, I would even go so far as to say that in very many cases, university law is more restrictive and less rights-based than even military code of justice, it would appear. What trend is that going in now? I mean, do you when you see results like this, it's got to be frightening from your perspective.
Yeah, we have a policy reform program, We track these speech codes, policies that infringe free speech in college campuses. And we have seen a general reduction in the amount of egregious speech codes, these so-called red light policies that clearly and substantially restrict free speech. And we're seeing an increase in schools, green light schools, that are fully protective of free speech. So we're seeing some positive trends in that direction. But we also have our individual rights defense program, where we do handle cases from professors and from students who had their free speech rights and due process rights violated by the university under university policies.
So you're seeing some blue sky here. It's the laser-like focus on the issue that might be shaking people up a little bit, kind of awakening them from their generational civil rights slumber. Certainly, though, this much media hype rise of Antifa versus the quote-unquote far right, the Bannon-esque soldiers of fortune, marching across America, looking to take your children away. From your perspective on campus, how much of that is hype versus reality? Are those two perspectives as prominent in day-to-day campus life as they're portrayed to be? I mean, there's almost a reefer madness element to it if you're a middle-class parent whose kids are away at college, to scare the bejesus out of you about your child waking up one day and being an Aryan youth or a hippie Antifa warrior. Yeah. I mean, how much of that is reality?
Yeah, I mean, since the election, students have been protesting college campuses. They've been organizing these political groups, and they've been making their voices heard. So I think it's definitely real that students are getting more involved with politics. They're getting more involved with these local organizations that promote either liberal or conservative or whatever viewpoints that they do, which is a good thing. Let's see students get out there and make their voices heard and get involved with politics. But at the same time, it's becoming very partisan on campus. We're seeing a lot of conservative groups getting a hard time through the university, through other groups, especially in California, and like a lot of colleges there, such as Berkeley. And so it's definitely a heated atmosphere. It's definitely a lot of passionate students trying to protest. And at FIRE, we fully support that. We fully agree that students should protest on campus, and they should make their voices heard, as long as they do that in a peaceful manner, that they don't interfere with the rights of others, and they don't use violence to support their ends.
Because what's impressive about your organization, while you clearly have very much a libertarian bent to your arguments, the folks at FIRE don't seem to be particularly threatened by left-wing or right-wing arguments. You're fiercely protective of the argument itself, not the content. And you're fiercely protective of the participatory nature, if you will, of the argument, not the fact that people are arguing. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. You're exactly right. FIRE is proudly nonpartisan. You're a nonprofit. We defend everybody. It does not matter what you say in terms of your political viewpoints and your leanings. We will defend liberals, the conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, and we have all across the political spectrum, which helps us really focus on the principles here. Helps us focus on the First Amendment, on what that entails on college campuses, on free speech principles, as opposed to simply playing partisan politics.
Excellent. Now, as always, how can folks get engaged with FIRE? How can folks support you financially? And where do you folks see yourself coming up to the Northeast at any time soon? I hope at some particular point to maybe venture into the bastions of the Ivy League. We could use a reality check up here.
I hope so too. We try to be everywhere at once. We do all American college campuses, so it's a big job. But for those who want to know more about us and what we stand for, you can visit us at thefire.org and thefire.org/donate to make a donation. And we encourage you to check out our blogs, our Twitter, our Facebook accounts, and please consider getting involved. Consider joining the fight and educate yourself and others on students and professors' civil liberties on college campuses.
No, absolutely. And to the local listeners who are watching this tonight or may watch it in the future, it's interesting because Rhode Island has a very mixed perspective. On one hand, you've got Brown University, known for being a somewhat occasionally intolerant host to non-liberal causes. And yet at the same time, you've got Providence College, which is a religious institution. It's run by a religious organization, and they are fiercely protective at times of conversations that they may deem inappropriate to their host religion, which in my mind is actually equally or even more challenging because it's religion that is being used as a barrier potentially to free speech. A few years back we had the controversy surrounding the vagina monologues here at Providence College, where it was essentially, as I remember, shut down. Please, folks, correct me if I'm wrong, based on its incompatibility with Roman Catholic teachings. A lot of controversy, particularly poignant because folks who are in academia who work at those universities are often, in fact, willingly subject to constraints because, well, quite frankly, it's a Catholic university. I'm not just saying a Catholic university is capable of that. Clearly, there's a number of religious universities and doctrines across this country which promote universities. So it's not just an Ivy League situation. It's just not, the extremes of Milo showing up at Cal. It happens everywhere and at every level, and that's why I have such a profound admiration for what you folks do, because you literally are on the front lines of freedom. Ultimately, if we raise a generation of, butthurt snowflakes, regardless of which political persuasion we are weaker as a country, aren't we?
We appreciate that. We appreciate the compliment. And the reality is that most college students today go to university that has a speech code, and we encourage students to go to thefire.org and type in their school and look at their speech policies. And if they don't like what they see, we encourage them to contact us, and we can help you do something about it and protect students' rights and free speech on college campuses.
Super. Well, joining me again, a good friend of the show, Zachary Greenberg. He is, in fact, with FIRE. I always have to read this to get this right. It's a Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
You got it.
Please go to their site, kick in a little do-re-mi, but at the same time, there's such a wealth of information that, and I'll leave you with this point, What's great about your site is the living embodiment, in one sense, of your mission. Your mission is to allow people to promote truth and discussion and conversation and political arguments. Your site simultaneously is a reflection of all the information you need to, on a fact basis, not a hearsay, not what you heard on local talk radio, not what you read in the local liberal newspaper, any of that. You go beyond outrage porn. You still believe in truth. Sometimes it's a very, and I hate to use these words, a very inconvenient truth, but your website and the materials you generate are an embodiment of your own personal philosophy, and I think, and that's why you're an organization that I hold in the highest regard. So again, thank you so much for gracing us. We're going to hope to have you on at least once a month or so as all these issues happen, because it's political whack-a-mole here, Zach, and any minute something's going to blow up tomorrow that we don't even know yet, do we?
We don't know. Always a pleasure, Pat. Thank